Welcome to this explainer. When most of us look at a world map, we usually just see a bunch of borders and different colored shapes. But what if we completely shifted our perspective for a minute? What if the globe is actually this massive, real-time laboratory constantly running high-stakes experiments on human society and survival every single day? Well, today, we're going to explore the exact framework that allows us to decode those global mysteries. We're going to look really closely at the method and sometimes the madness of how human societies govern themselves, and more importantly, why they do it so incredibly differently. Okay, let's dive right into this. Consider a massive empirical mystery. Why is it that some countries can sustain stable, long-lasting democracies, while others, sometimes literally right next door, sharing the exact same history and geography, crumble into authoritarianism? This isn't just some abstract philosophical debate you have in a coffee shop. It's a real question based on hard facts and observation. We really want to know the why and the how. And when we study global politics through a comparative lens, we're actively hunting for patterns. We're looking at similarities and differences across various nations to explain exactly why certain political phenomena happen the way they do. Here's a second, equally critical real-world puzzle for you. What causes ethnic conflict to violently explode in one specific valley while a region just across the river remains entirely peaceful? It's wild to think about, right? But this brilliantly illustrates that studying global politics absolutely isn't just about memorizing historical dates or reading constitutions or knowing the names of capital cities. It's about solving actual life-or-death riddles. We are literally examining the structural mechanics of society to understand the underlying forces that drive peace, conflict, prosperity, and sometimes total collapse. Now, to solve these puzzles, we kind of have to define our boundaries first. People very often confuse two major branches of political science: international relations and comparative politics. But they are fundamentally different things. International relations focuses on the interactions between countries. So think treaties, global wars, international trade, stuff like that. Comparative politics, which is our focus today, takes a totally different approach. It looks inside the countries. It basically opens up the hood of a nation to examine its internal institutions, its domestic behavior, its internal conflicts, and its unique culture. And then it takes those internal workings and compares them directly to other nations. So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly by the political scientist Aaron Livhart. He pointed out something pretty revolutionary at the time. Comparative politics isn't just a topic you study, it's actually a method. We aren't just casually sitting back and watching the evening news, we are using comparison as a rigorous scientific tool. By placing different political systems side by side, we establish a robust framework for analysis that literally unlocks the secrets of how human governance actually functions. Which brings us to our formal definition. Comparative politics is the systematic study, comparison, and analysis of the world's political systems, institutions, and behaviors. But honestly, I want you to think of it as serving a dual purpose. It acts as both a subject of study, like the actual real-world institutions and behaviors we're looking at, and a scientific method used to test hypotheses across totally different societies. For example, comparing the parliamentary system of India with the presidential system of the United States, that isn't just fun trivia. It allows us to actually test hypotheses about which system is better at representing vast, highly diverse populations. But, the field hasn't always looked the way it does today. Historically, the discipline was deeply Eurocentric. It focused almost entirely on Western European democracies and the United States. It was a pretty narrow lens, to be honest. But over time, the field had this realization that to truly understand human governance, you can't just look at a tiny fraction of the globe. Today, its nature is genuinely global. It analyzes developing nations, post-colonial states, and incredibly diverse regimes all across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And this global awakening didn't just happen overnight. It evolved through some very distinct historical phases. Now, what's really interesting about this evolution is how dramatically the whole discipline transformed over the decades. Before 1945, during what we call the traditional phase, the field was mainly descriptive. Scholars were basically just sitting in libraries, reading legal documents, and describing what a government looked like on paper. But then in the 1950s and 60s, the behavioral revolution hit. Scholars realized something huge. Paper constitutions don't vote. People do. So they started using scientific data, field surveys, and statistical analysis to study actual human behavior. The 1970s post-behavioral phase then brought the focus back to practical, real-world political issues. And today, in the contemporary phase, we're looking at incredibly complex dynamics like globalization, political economy, and democratization. And all of this evolution has really shaped the modern nature of the field. Today, this discipline strives to be completely objective and value-free. Now, in politics, that is incredibly hard to do, but it means we have to act like scientists, observing causal relationships, rather than armchair critics judging which system is morally superior. We just want to know why things happen. So it's highly scientific and empirical, relying heavily on hard data collection and deep qualitative case studies. It's also interdisciplinary. You really can't understand a political system without pulling insights from sociology, economics, history, and even psychology. And finally, it's highly dynamic. I mean, political systems are constantly shifting thanks to globalization, new technology, and social movements. So, if we go back to treating the world as a laboratory, we are essentially putting these governments under a high-powered microscope. To explain why some states experience violent instability while others absolutely thrive in wealth and peace, we have to meticulously dissect their internal anatomy layer by layer. And under that microscope, our scope of study has just exploded. The old traditional way was all about formal structures, written versus unwritten constitutions, or just looking at the formal branches of government, like the executive, legislative, and judicial. But the modern approach realizes that real power very often lies in the unwritten rules. Today, we heavily analyze informal structures and dynamic societal forces. We're studying political culture, public opinion, the massive influence of NGOs, interest groups, and the broader economic markets. That's where the real action is. Let's drill down into that modern scope just a bit more. We aren't just looking at who wins an election anymore. We're analyzing the mechanics of regime transitions. How does a country actually manage to transition from a dictatorship to a democracy? Or, on the flip side, what causes democratic backsliding? We're investigating political economy too. How a government's management of its markets directly dictates your wallet and your daily stability. We analyze electoral systems, voting behavior, and we compare public policy, looking really closely at how different governments choose to handle education, health, the environment, and welfare. But here is the ultimate challenge, and really the driving force behind all of this. We cannot run controlled experiments on countries. Think about it. If a chemist wants to know what happens when two chemicals mix, they just go to a lab, isolate the variables, and run a test. We can't do that. There's no way to build nations in test tubes. We can't just implement a brand new electoral system in a perfectly controlled environment just to see what happens. Therefore, we must use comparative analysis. Looking at the messy, real world and comparing different systems is literally the only way we can put our political theories to the test. So, why does all this meticulous comparing actually matter to you? Well, first, it tests our hypotheses, like checking whether proportional representation voting systems always lead to coalition governments. Second, and this is huge, it acts as a cure for ethnocentrism. By studying alternative ways of organizing a society, it prevents us from arrogantly assuming our own country's system is the only natural or superior standard out there. Third, it heavily informs public policy. If lawmakers want to design better domestic laws, they can literally look abroad to see which institutional frameworks succeed or fail in similar situations. And finally, it helps us predict trends. Let's focus on that last point for a second, predicting trends. While we obviously don't have a magic crystal ball to predict exact political outcomes, identifying these historical and cross-national patterns acts as an incredibly powerful early warning system. By comparing political systems, scholars can spot the structural blueprints of democratic erosion or the resilience of an authoritarian regime long before the actual collapse happens. It's all about seeing the cracks in the foundation before the entire house falls down. So I want to leave you with this thought. Now that you understand how to use this objective, scientific method to look inside countries, how is it going to change the way you watch the evening news? Based on the cross-national patterns you observe out there in the world, what global political trends or warning signs are flashing right now? The world is your laboratory, and you now have the tools to analyze the experiment. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep comparing, and keep learning.